It was McKinsey or it was Gallup a few years ago that did research on like 50,000 execs in North America. And they were asking them, like, what do you think is the number one skill for the next 10 years? What's the most important? And 86% said strategic thinking time. And then in the same survey, they asked them, do you do it? And I think pretty much 85%, 86% said, haven't got the time.
Hello and welcome to the Gross Profit Podcast. My name is James Kennedy, CEO and co-founder at procurementexpress.com. We take the hassle out of managing your company's spend with magical features, but we're not going to talk about that today. Instead, I have invited a long-term associate, friend, I guess, Shane Cradock from my native Ireland, in the Garden of Ireland, Wicklow, I understand, to come along today to talk about how to win at life. Ambitious title for this podcast. So, Shane, thanks very much for coming along. Maybe you could just introduce yourself for the listeners.
I spent the last maybe 23 years working with leaders in, I suppose sometimes they'll call me a high performance advisor, coaching capacity. And you asked me what I was passionate about beforehand. And I was saying, well, look, my probably number one thing personally, which also comes through in my work very much with my clients, is how do you win at the game of life? And sure, why not put an ambitious question out there? Not the easiest question to answer, but wouldn't it be cool to actually really see, can you get a meaningful answer to that question? So, and the book that I brought out recently is very much about that. Yeah,
so you might have stumbled across this podcast wondering, I'm sure you subscribed to a podcast about finance and managing purchasing, and suddenly we're talking about the game of life. The reason we're still talking about this is I've been to a few conferences recently, CFOs, senior level execs, focused in finance, but the same issues kind of come up. In Europe especially, there's often that career track between CFO and CEO. And sure, we're all trying to win at life. And the thing that really struck me was once you get above the day-to-day, getting the accounts in and making the board packs, all that stuff behind you, the issues at the senior level are very similar. Performance management, goal setting, where you're going. So I know you primarily focus on CEOs and entrepreneurs, I guess. But I think what we're going to talk about today would be relevant for anyone in a leadership role in a business.
Well, assuming that they have a mind. So we'll kind of leave that up to the listener, but I'm assuming that they do. I think it'd be important to kind of qualify that for me, like what is the game of life? Because I think everybody has their own definition. But for me, like the way I look at it is it's like a double-sided coin. On one side is the game of success, which everybody's interested in. Certainly everybody listening to this, I would assume. So whether that's in terms of progressing their careers, promotions, running a business, just growth, development, and whatever goals they have. So that's the game of success. But the challenge that you have, and I think this is one of the issues in the modern world, is that I think we've been sold something that is a bit of a myth, is that if I succeed at the game of success, then I will enjoy my life and I will be fulfilled. Unfortunately, that's not true. So the other side of the coin is what I would call the game of fulfillment. Or on one level, I call it the game of aliveness. What seems to be true from my own experience, and I can only talk to my own experience, is that the better I get at the game of fulfillment and aliveness, actually, the better I also get at the game of success. And that is, to me, the formula around how do you win more at life. Because I've done it myself in my past where I was obsessed with the game of success and I just said, screw the other side of the coin because that's for softies. That just didn't work. And I paid the price, big time in many ways. Got a chance then to go, well, hang on, that doesn't work. Is there an alternative way? And that's pretty much what I've spent most of my career exploring. And because it's a personal project in a way, I mean, I'm lucky that I get to work to bring my own learnings into my work with my clients and test them to see if they're BS or not, James. Because, as you and I were joking before, and some of this stuff, everybody has an opinion on this kind of stuff. What I like about the world of finance, the thing I like the most about the world of finance, other than, seeing cash in bank is always a very important thing. The thing I love the most is that it's numbers are everything. So what's the scoreboard? So the finance department have the scoreboard. That's how I know if I'm winning in business. But how do I know if I'm winning in life? But they're both interconnected.
Well, I was speaking with this morning a fractional CFO and senior in her career, and she explained how she would have to put on her masculine energy in certain circumstances, which I thought was an interesting turn of phrase. And it sounds a little bit like what you're talking about there when we talk about success. Business is very male dominated, I guess. And we have this feeling, even sport, that's the other analogy. Sport analogies are made all the time where you're kind of hard charging, you're tough, you're focused. I think we've all seen it at any high level. People who are very high level in sport or business, oftentimes the other side is just a total mess, you know. I see it frequently.
Well, with that woman, I'd say about 50% of my clients are female, and I'm aware of those conversations where they say, oh, I have to kind of be more like a man in this situation. And the one thing I'd always say to women is that, well, that's fine in a certain context, but please don't lose what makes you a woman, because that's what's needed in business. And so even if you look at all the trends and even what most of the futurists will talk about in terms of what's needed in business, we need the male context of achievement, goal orientation. But we also need, you know, what's becoming a phrase in corporate world, which is emotional intelligence, the ability to connect with people. That's what leadership is all about. And so if you go back to how do you win at the game of life, I'd often ask my clients, or if I'm speaking at something, I'd say, look, what do you think has the single biggest impact on your success and your happiness in life? And I wait for different answers. And ultimately, the answer that I'm looking for, because this is my experience, is that it's your mind and how you manage your inner world. And that's the context about the book that I wrote, The Inner CEO. And the metaphor is that if you can imagine that, like, you have an inner organization. So anybody who's leading an organization listening to this, or even leading a division or leading a department, they understand that, hang on, to make this area of the business work, or to make the overall business work, I need to understand the different elements inside it. I need to make sure that they're all working towards where I want them to go in terms of the common vision and the goals. And I need to make sure that people are aligned and they've got the right people in the right places. And the metaphor I use is, pretend your inner world is the same thing. Now, most people in my experience are not actually leading their mind. Their mind is leading them. And that's a big problem. And so it can manifest in different ways, like self-sabotage, doubt, damaging your own confidence, going in cycles of ups and downs. And in worst case scenario, it can affect things like addiction, whether that's through, you know, alcohol or other forms of addiction. And even stress, you know, that there's so much stress and fatigue, and we were talking about burnout before, you know, so all of those to me are indicators that, okay, there's improvement that can be made here about how do I lead my mind? How do I manage my mind? Something that
a lot of people will listen to this and their natural sales resistance will go up when you start talking about the mind. And I'll admit, I'm one of those people. As soon as it starts getting woo-woo, I'm like, hold on, what's going on here? Yeah. What's interesting about your take is, A, you've got an engineering sort of mindset or background to it, and your model for thinking about, you know, what the mind is versus what you do. Like, if I was to put my engineering mind on it, there's certain behaviors which are evidence of something else happening. Like people who are, you know, do self-destructive things. I always think of poor old Bill Clinton and the trouble he got into. And it's like, well, in what world was it logical to him that the trouble he got into, there was no logical basis for, you know, how his name has gone down in history, let's say, in a crazy way. And lots of people, you mentioned destructive habits there that people do. And we do it. I do it. We all do sort of self-destructive stuff. And if we were really as logical as we thought we were, they would just never happen, right? So there's a lot of evidence for something else going on, right? Because if we were as smart as we thought we were, then none of these things would happen in the first place.
No. And to your point, like, I think the logical part of our minds, the intellect, would like to think that we do everything by logic. But the reality is, and economists know this now, is that we're emotional beings and we make decisions, actually key decisions, big decisions very often based on emotion or, and sometimes, compulsion. And so that's pointing to something deeper, which is really, you're kind of going into the area of the unconscious mind and unconscious behavior. And we're all emotional. And so I think in the previous era of the world, in terms of business, for me, like if you'd call that maybe the industrial age model, I think you would have got away with the logical side of things only. Whereas we're into an era now that is different. Like, first of all, the factory model of 9 to 5 industrial thing, you don't have to think at a high level in the same way. In the world we live in today, the complexity is so different to what it was 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years ago. The volatility, the ambiguity. So, and then we've got this explosion of technology, which is incredible, but it's bringing all sorts of challenges as well in terms of just trying to keep up and overload and communication and email and everything else. It's so easy to get overloaded. So that's where I think the challenges, the opportunities of ours, what we're seeing is for most people, you know, if they're listening to this with, you know, win at the game of life. I mean, look, I just want to win today. Forget about the game of life, Shane. I just want to win today. And I'd say, look, well, today is a good place to start. But I think what I'd be saying to them is, look, it could be as simple as saying, well, it's really about managing yourself, because if you can learn a few things that help you to manage yourself just a little bit better so that your mood is at a higher level and that your energy is even just a little bit better, your thinking quality goes up. And if you can get even a 20% improvement in your thinking quality, everything ripples out of that, because we're moving into a world now where higher quality thinking is going to be, in my mind anyway, probably the distinguishing factor between success and failure.
Well, I see amongst my customers all the time, there's almost a pride in being busy, like the month end, the board deck, the preparation, the pressure. Deadlines are relentless, especially in finance, and keeping the trains running on time. And what constantly everyone says is, it'd be great to free up my time for more strategic thinking.
Yeah.
And then they create some time and it's like, well, now what? Just because you have time available doesn't mean you're thinking at a high level, right? So what can you do about that?
No, I think a great question to ask is how do I think at a higher level? That's a great question to ask. I think it's a very personal thing, but there are some things that I think I could point you in straight away. I think, for example, if you want to have good strategic time, I think a good starting place would be, what are the strategically high value questions that I'm trying to answer? And if you can kind of make a list of the questions that you're trying to answer that and almost rate them. I have a section myself on my computer and my phone in Apple Notes that I just call high value questions. And those questions go in there because very often, the way sometimes you can be walking along, maybe you're exercising, you're going for a swim, or maybe you're in the gym, or you're just doing something unconnected with your work. And all of a sudden, boom, out of nowhere comes in a thought. And you go, oh yeah, that's what I should be doing the next time I'm doing. And then if you don't note that, it'll probably be gone with the busy mind. So if you find a place where you can put stuff, I collect questions. I'm always looking for good questions. Probably in my role in terms of the coaching side of things, you realize if you ask the right question at the right time with the right mindset, that's the value sometimes of getting an external advisor or mentor or coach, whatever you want to call them. So that's another way of doing strategically high value questions, that you could get somebody to provoke questions, say, hey, I'm going to make time. So for example, this morning I had the CEO sitting in front of me here in my office in Wicklow in Ireland. And part of the reason he's here with me, apart from me trying to educate him on managing his mind, the other reason he's here is that I will force him to answer, or at least look at a question that is highly important. And going back to your point, I'm pretty sure it was McKinsey or it was Gallup a few years ago that did research on, I think it was something like 50,000 execs, I believe, maybe in North America. And they were asking them, like, what do you think is the number one skill for the next 10 years? What's the most important? And 86% said strategic thinking time. And then in the same survey, they asked them, do you do it? And I think pretty much 85%, 86% said, haven't got the time. That's the problem, though. If I'm a CEO listening to that, I'm thinking, holy crap, my senior guys aren't doing it. But as I said to the CEO this morning, I said, why would they do it if you're not modeling it? So as a leader, you have to kind of model it. I'm taking time out to think. And then what will happen is others will see it. I mean, apart from the impact and the benefit, and that's just kind of really leading your mind, because the other side of it is that, like, everybody listening to this has an inner voice. And I speak about this in the book, The Inner CEO, is that you have an inner voice and it's commenting all the time. So for some people, their inner voice might now be saying, this is a load of rubbish. I like James, but I don't like this other weird guy. Why is he talking about this? Or they could be saying, oh, this is interesting. There's something about this. Or it could be saying, what am I going to have for lunch? But the reality is that, and like, it's not just me saying this. When you've got like the top university in the world, MIT, saying in a leadership, innovation and creativity capacity, and finance people, in my mind, the best I've ever worked with, are very creative. So they understand and value creativity, especially when it comes to things like investments and raising money and things like that. Just incredible, especially tax and everything else. But the number one thing that MIT have identified is the biggest blocker to better leadership, creativity, innovation is the inner voice, or lack of awareness of it, or lack of control of it. So again, that you've gone into the inner domain. And it's funny because, you know, you mentioned the word woo-woo. You know, I think if I look back on my own life and career, there was times where I too, because my inner skeptic is quite healthy, believe it or not. I don't, you know, it takes a lot probably to prove things to me, even though I'm into an area that a lot of people might perceive to be woo-woo. But because I've had such challenging experiences around it, I mean, I think as I explained to you, you know, when I was in my 20s, I was suicidally depressed for a period of time. So I was forced to face myself in a way that maybe not everybody is. Some people listening to this probably have. But that forced me to kind of look at the inner world in a different way than I'd ever looked at before. And to your point about engineering, because I'd done engineering, I did chemical engineering, looking back, I didn't realize it, but it was probably that mindset of engineering, which is very practical, that kind of, I think, has stood to me. And I've been trying to make stuff that I think is overcomplicated to make it more digestible, more practical.
Well, let me ask you directly, because in the book you talk about you are not your mind. What do you really mean by that?
When I went through that difficult period, there was a key day where I decided I was going to leave the world. So my inner voice had said, it's better off for the world if you take your life and leave. Now, at the time, I didn't know any difference between me and my inner voice, or even me and my mind. And luckily enough, my dad, in a synchronistic kind of a way, managed to intervene and also connect me with a very professional and human counselor, a guy called Morris. And that same day, I had the opportunity to sit in front of him. And one of the first things he said to me was, Shane, do you realize that you have a mind? Now, this is the honest to God truth, James. I think I said this in the book, but I can't remember. In my head, I was thinking, oh God, here we go with this woo-woo BS. I just want to fix my problems and go home.
Give me a pill.
Exactly. Give me a pill. Give me a few of them. But he was very much against medication at the time. I was like, I said, kind of, but what's that got to do with anything? And he said, well, it's got everything to do with it, because he said, your mind is completely messed up. Your thinking is all over the place. And he said, you have a mind and we need to kind of untangle it. And I'm going to help you if you want. But I heard that in two ways. First of all, I heard that I have a mind in the same way that I have, you know, I'm holding up a phone, I have a phone, right? So, and then I realized, oh, I have a phone, I have this thing, but nobody's ever trained me how to use this thing. So, oh, that's interesting. I've never read a user manual about my mind. Now, as an engineer, you have ops manuals and user manuals for everything, right? So I was like, what? Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, big question mark there. But then the second thing, which was in a way a more confusing thing, was I realized, hang on, if I have a mind, that means I'm separate to my mind. Because if I said to you, are you your phone? You go, no, of course not. I can put it away. It's over here. It's a tool. It's an asset. So then I went, oh, well then who the hell am I? Now that was more confusing. And in time became a strategically important question for me personally to answer. And that kind of evolved over time. And then I realized, oh, hold on. That's kind of what I talk about in the book, is that, you know, if you say to me, well, who or what is the inner CEO? As well as being the leader of your mind, really what it is it's the awareness that is behind your mind. So I'm aware of my mind, but that we are separate. So if I say to you, James, look, are you aware of what you're thinking right now? You can kind of tune into it and go, yes, I am. But that means something is looking at it. That's you. So my mind, you know, whatever you think it is, my mind to me is, this is how I define it, it's a programmable field of energy. It's not tangible. It seems to be connected to my brain, which is tangible, which is real. And what's interesting about from the scientific community is that it's still actually, that's debatable, because 50% of the scientific community say that there is a mind and 50% say that there isn't, right? Because actually, where is it? But for me, if I go, well, what's 5 times 5? Hopefully you know the answer.
Yeah, 25. Just proving I'm listening.
Are you sure? I'm sure the finance people listening to this should definitely know the answer. But then you think, how do I know that? Because somewhere in the past, if you're like me, I repeated that until it became a habit. And so in the same way, if I'm learning a car, at the start it's awkward, It's very conscious. Through repetition, it becomes unconscious. It's a programmable field of energy. But in the same way, I have memories, I have knowledge. I learn, most of knowledge is learned by, rote memory, and you're just trying to take things in. You've got your experiences. So my mind is there, and it's hugely valuable if I can leverage it. But if I think I'm my mind, then whatever it says to me, I have to believe, as in, take your life. Now, that's obviously hugely extreme.
So can I ask a question about that? If you're not your mind, we're both raised in Ireland, and I was raised Catholic, which means I was given a black belt in guilt straight out of the bat. So does that mean you can sort of, like, let's say if I was in a dark time, things I'm ashamed of saying or things I wish I'd said differently and I'd feel bad about it. Does that mean I can step away from that and say, well, that wasn't really me, that's okay? Or was it me that did something wrong? If I do something wrong, like to someone or make someone feel bad or whatever, I immediately feel bad about that. And that's what inhibits me from doing other things. But is that me doing those things? Or is that just the chemicals flushing through my brain?
There's plenty of chemicals flushing through your brain. That's happening all the time. But I think in terms of your specific situation, it does mean, to me, it does mean that I can separate from that. I can kind of go, do you know what? Most of us have said things and done things that we regret afterwards. That's the truth. But that doesn't mean as a mature person that I can't say to you, hey, James, listen, you know what I said to you last week? I'm sorry. I didn't really mean that. I said it in the heat of the moment. It was a bad mistake. So it doesn't mean that I can't be mature enough to say, hey, listen, my bad. I own that. That was wrong. The challenge is that I think a lot of people walk around, if I'm being really honest, and this is very relevant to leaders, is that any sort of baggage that I'm carrying around that is taking away or damaging my inner energy is not a good thing for my state of mind, which means it's bad for my leadership ability. So most people, you're talking about being Irish. Yeah, we definitely, I think our parents' generation before us had it worse. I think that they had it much worse. I think we have it easier on one level. Doesn't matter where in the world you're listening to this, there's probably versions of guilt in your culture. Universal. That's a universal human thing. But I think it gives me great freedom. It doesn't mean that I don't feel negative emotions, but what it does mean is that I'm very quick to come out of them because I realize, oh, hang on, if there's a virus in my phone, okay, I need to deal with it because they are mental viruses. But because I know it's my phone, I can detach from it and go, look, okay, fine, we can deal with that, or I can ignore it, or I can address it. I'm not a big fan of going into the past and stewing on it or dredging up dirt. I just don't. It doesn't work. I think that's actually where psychology has it wrong. In my experience, mainstream psychology has it wrong. Is that getting caught up with the past? It's very limiting. That's the home of things like limiting beliefs and things like that. And I'm very interested in breaking beliefs, resetting beliefs, because like what you believe as an organization is pretty much determined by what we believe as leaders.
So what reminded me that you said there was like, you're letting go of these. You can experience the emotions and then let go of them, which sounds like what you try and do in meditation, I guess. And in the book, you talk about how these are tools, but they don't address the cause of the problem. Is meditation you should not bother with then because it's just a sort of lipstick on a pig? Or what is the real problem? Okay,
the real issue to me is probably just a lack of understanding about how your mind works. I think meditation, I think what you're referring to in the book is that the meditation and mindfulness are very useful. So they remove a version of pain. So most people get into meditation mindfulness because probably, let's just say there's stress, some version of stress. And so they'll do that to reduce the irritation inside or the pain inside. And that's a good thing. So an aspirin, can remove a headache. So that's a good thing. But it doesn't necessarily, if you go back into the engineering mindset, you're always kind of thought, well, what's the root cause? You got to go upstream. What's the root cause? And so to me, then, if you keep on, where my journey led me in terms of exploration was, well, actually the root cause for my stress is really down to me not understanding how to manage myself in certain circumstances. Now, I might blame my boss. I might blame the market. I might blame the fact that I have 25 deadlines in 26 days. But really, it's more to do with how I'm reacting to those circumstances. And so what I was very interested in, because of my own personal experience, was, can you be in the exact same circumstances, but change your mindset inside or change how you're mentally looking at something and thereby feel differently about it? And that seems to be true, is my experience. And that's kind of what's happened with my own work, where in 2008, 2009, when the crash happened, I was trying to talk to people about the mental game, James. And in Ireland, not the easiest thing to do. Come back to the Catholic thing and suspicion and all that kind of stuff. You talk about the mental game. It's like, what are you talking about? And you just get a lot of resistance. It was difficult. So I just focused on, let's just focus on practical stuff like results and standard business stuff in terms of the typical stuff on leadership and things like that, and projections and strategy. But when the crash happened, there was such an increase in stress. This is 2008, 9, 10, that pretty much all of my clients who had resisted said to me, hey, can we talk about the mental game, because I'm stressed out of my mind. So I had an opportunity then from 2010 to 2020 until the pandemic to test things in a certain way. But when the pandemic happened, the stress levels obviously went into a different stratosphere. And what I found since then is that way more people are open to having this conversation than ever before. Now, it doesn't remove the skepticism. And I think being a healthy skeptic is a good thing. People are more open-minded to it. And there does seem to be a kind of an interest and a hunger for exploring more in this area.
Personally, speaking on this topic, I'm a computer scientist, uber nerd, and when AI and generative AI came along, it cracked my head open a little bit, because I'd heard Bill Gates and Sam Altman discussing, what AI is, and Bill asked Sam a question, which was like, the interesting thing is this model that we've created can give us all sorts of answers. We have no clue how or why it does it. In every other area of programming, computer science, you can point to the place where the data is saved, and you can exactly explain how everything came to be. Whereas somehow there's this emergent behavior almost, and a simple, very, very simple model by comparison to our own brains that can go, it's a different level. It's just a level we can't even explain logically, Yes. And it's in a computer, for God's sake. If it's in a computer and we can't explain it, then how the hell? Yeah. You got to accept there's sort of a meta layer that happens, beyond the meat in our brain. There's a existence which is, just not explained by the ones and zeros or the way the chemicals work or all these things, and there's sort of a different layer. And maybe in the future, we don't exist in our meat bags anymore. We exist just in a computer somewhere. But what it showed, what I got from that was, oh, hold on, maybe I'm not that complicated. Like, maybe these things are just, happening to me. And actually this feeling of guilt is kind of pointless, because I'm not in control as much as I think I am, maybe sometimes. Yeah. Or maybe I just get to decide. I get to decide when I'm brilliant, that's my fault. When I'm wrong, that's just the chemicals. Don't worry about it, James. Get on with it. Maybe I should still apologize, but.
Well, actually, I saw that interview as well. I thought it was quite interesting, but I think, with AI in particular, if you mentioned emergent behavior, and I think we're in a time where, in a way, it's almost like an emergent future, which is less predictable. And that the mind doesn't like that, because human minds like to have predictability, and they like to have control. But they're both perceptions. So I can have perceived control. The reality is, we all found out with the pandemic, are we really in control? I'm not really sure about that. I think the universe and life and the world, there's certain things happening that we just don't have control on. We've no visibility on. And I think we are definitely in an era of, like, anything can happen at any time. Now, when you're in that kind of scenario, even unconsciously, I think that's unsettling. So I have a phrase I use with clients, which is, inner clarity is real power, right? Now, what that means to me is the intellect and that part of your mind is like, it's incredibly powerful. A lot of your listeners here will have, I know, razor sharp intellects because they're financial whiz people. And the intellect allowed us to split the atom, to invent this incredible technology that we're talking through. People are listening on all sorts of devices, which the intellect really has enabled. And as an engineer and as a financial person and as a great even business person, the intellect is revered, and rightly so. But for the age that's coming, it can't be in charge. But what needs to be in charge is a part of you, I think, that is more intuitive, more creative, connected to a deeper part of you that just can actually adapt very quickly to whatever emerges now. And so it's a bit like, in a way, I don't know if anybody listening to this is into like theater or drama, but it's a bit like a great improvisation mindset. The improviser's mindset is all about, we go into this situation, and whatever comes in the situation, I'm not going to say no to it. I'm not going to react to it. I'm just going to build from it. And there's a phrase in improvisation where they say it's called yes and. So no matter what you say or what you do in the scene with me, I'll go, yes, James, and here we go in this direction. And we just build on each other. That's a very simple way I think of what's coming and where we are now. And I think to kind of go with a yes and mindset, you need to have an inner understanding of yourself where sometimes your mind might be reacting, kind of going, no, I don't like this, or I'm confused, or I'm stressed, or I'm afraid of saying something or doing something or challenging something, because that's what the inner voice does. And so the more we understand actually the extent to which our inner voice, our inner world is actually the key variable of not just, again, success in the business, but also just the ability to be in the moment. Like the more I'm able to be in the moment, I'll be better in business, better in meetings, better on podcast calls, and better with my family, better with my kids. And when I sit down to have a glass of wine or a beer, looking out to the sea, I can actually enjoy it, as opposed to being in my head thinking about spreadsheets or projections or what meeting is coming up. So the skill of the improviser is probably not a bad analogy, even though a lot of people won't like improvisation. But if you've ever met a great improviser, probably their key skill is their ability to just be 100% in the moment and accept whatever comes in. And then they will adapt to that. They don't retreat from it. They go into it. Does that make sense?
Super hard to crowd out your mind, to be clear enough to listen, to be present enough to do that. Even in a simple conversation like this, it's very hard for me not to think about, we're coming up on time.
Yes.
But actually engage and react and be present. I mean, with our kids, it's the big one, right? We've all played with our kids sort of with an eye on waiting for the 15 minutes to be up or whatever, And then when you give into it, if you can give into playing with your kids, truly playing with them, it's brilliant. If you don't, it's sort of kind of boring. It's kind of like, God knows my kids are boring sometimes. But actually, it's just because I'm thinking about the next thing instead of just being there with them.
But let me share with you a story that might resonate with some of your listeners, because it was to do with a client who worked in a big financial institution in a bank, large bank, and really smart female leader, C-suite level. I was working with her for a period of time, and you're kind of, you're working with the client, and they're obviously going to be very driven and focused on specific outcomes and goals, personal, professional, and very often people who are just very motivated. You don't really need to motivate them. It's more about maybe helping as a sounding board or just making sure that they're not really blocking themselves. But anytime I'd speak to her about that area, which is cultivating the skill of actually calming your mind, being in the present more, you always get this natural resistance, which I'm used to. And I'd given her a specific tool, which I share in the book, called shifts. You mentioned before, and I'll come back to the metaphor of the snow globe in a second. She just wouldn't talk about it. She said, look, I'm too busy to be doing that, Shane. With respect, I like you, but that's a bit, that is a bit woo-woo, Shane. Until I met her one session, and she said to me the previous morning, she'd been driving her kids to school, and she was thinking about the day ahead, and she was going through the 100 things she had to do. And she came up to a turnoff for the school, which was a one-way system, and she was thinking so busy in her mind that she missed it. And it was a 15-minute loop around to get back to the same place. And she was kind of laughing, thinking about me, said, if he was here now, he'd be giving out to me, and da-da-da-da-da. And I was thinking, really? Is that the way you think about me? Anyway, she came around again, started thinking about work. Didn't she miss the turnoff a second time? And she said, I wasn't laughing then because I had to go back again. So now the kids were late. I was late getting to work. And then she said, on the way to work after I dropped the kids off, I was thinking to myself, oh my God, my mind is so busy that I did that twice. And then she said, if my mind is that busy, what am I missing in work? And then she said, if my mind is that busy, I'm making everybody else around me busy. What is everybody else missing in work? And that was the moment that she then said to me, talk to me about how do you calm your mind in a busy job? How do you learn the skill of clarity? And see, the nice thing about it, James, is that it's transferable. So if I can figure out how to train myself, and it is training, to be present in a meeting in business at a high level, in any context where I'm more present, I will get more out of the meeting, so will everybody else. But that skill is transferable. I can transfer that skill to home with my kids and be present, but not if I'm training my mind to be like an absolute lunatic during the day, jumping from one thing to the next, which is actually the way the world is set up, unfortunately.
So we've teased something very powerful, which is the snow globe technique and the shifts paradigm. But I'm going to leave them as a cliffhanger for people who are interested to find out more. The shifts technique is particularly interesting.
Can I give you two things there before they go? One is, very quickly, I will give you a link to a download for people to kind of read the shifts paradigm and the snow globe. So without buying the book, it's for free. They can just get it, so they can just get a taste of it. And the second thing is that, just very quickly, the snow globe effect means that your mind is like a snow globe. It works best when it's calm, clear, and when it's settled. And if that strikes a chord, then maybe click the link on your podcast here, James, to get the download.
We'll put a link in the comments there so people can get access to that. And where can people find you or your book, Shane?
Well, working backwards, the book is The Inner CEO by me, Shane Cradock, and they can get that pretty much anywhere online. They can go to the innerceo.com, or they can go to Amazon in particular. And then for myself, my business is me, Shane Cradock, at cradock.com, 1D, and my information is there.
Well, thanks very much for listening, guys. I hope you found this useful. I totally got absorbed in this, and I have to say it's one of the reasons I love doing the podcast. I get to have a deep conversation with someone like Shane I wouldn't ordinarily get a chance to chat with. So if you like this type of content, please leave a comment or email me, james.kennedy@procurementexpress.com, and we'll try and get more for you. And until the next one, see you again.